And that emotional connection is what creates that bond. Whereas if it is simply a technical or, kind of a surface relationship where basically, yes, the architect took the program and they fit it all within the box and they checked off, we've got this, we've got 2 of those, we've got 3 of those bathrooms, we've got an elevator. And if it simply is a list, to me, that's the difference between success and not having a successful project. It's the difference between a building and architecture.
What's architecture really about? Archispeak is the show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we're passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Cormac Phelan. Join Evan Troxel, Neil Pan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in and find out. It's time for some Archispeak.
All right, well, welcome to episode 15 of the Archispeak Podcast. I'm Neil Pan.
I'm Evan Troxel.
And I'm Cormac Phelan.
And Evan, I believe you have some friends of the show you'd like to announce?
We do. This week we had several people become friends of the show, and the first one on the list is Mark R. LePage, Mark from Entrepreneur Architect. You can find out more from Mark at entrearchitect.com, and he gave $10. So thanks, Mark. We really appreciate it. Next we have Steve Steneker. Steve is our hero, right? He gave $50, and we are blown away by his donation. Thank you very much, Steve. Next, we had Tim Barber. Tim Barber is a $20 donation, and he asked us to say that it was a donation made by a Cogill Hall alum from Virginia Tech. And the last donation that we have this week, friend of the show, is Smart Tools LLC, a repeat offender here. They donated again 2 weeks in a row. And you can learn more about Smart Tools LLC at smarttoolsllc.com. There's one T in the middle there. And they make an iPhone app for doing punch lists, which could be very beneficial to many of our listeners. So thank you, everybody, for being a friend of the show this week. And we really appreciate it.
All right, so this week we're going to talk about constraints. And Evan, I think you had an explanation of what you think constraints are.
Yeah, so when I think about the projects that we work on, and I don't think it matters the scale, there's always a list of constraints that we can rattle off, that in particular, I guess the reason I think about this is because typically it's stuff that people who end up either seeing or using the building are never even made aware of. And I'm wondering, I guess the ultimate goal of talking about this is there a way for architects to tell stories about these particular constraints? Because I think it makes the project more interesting and it makes it more real to the people who see it and use it when they understand the things that we had to deal with, whether they're financial constraints, whether they're physical or geographical, whether they're programmatic constraints. There's all kinds of constraints that we deal with. There's stylistic constraints, whatever. And so that's kind of the basis of the idea of constraints in architecture. And I'd love to see kind of where we can take it tonight. So there we are.
Well, can I start it off by playing devil's advocate real quick and ask, do we really want the end user to fully understand the constraints, or do we want them to enjoy the spoils of those constraints without, really understanding all of the toil that kind of went into it, but really just kind of focusing on, okay, all of this happened with all of these things, all of these challenges, all of these collaborations, everything else, that all of the constraints that were thrown on it. But what we really want them to see is just the kind of like unadulterated, here it is, here's the end result, enjoy it the way you want to perceive it.
Well, I mean, as far as they're concerned, there aren't any. That's how I can see it.
Right. I mean, I guess I'm asking only because do you really want to know? Do you want to know what it takes a doctor to go through to do a knee surgery, or do you just want him to do the knee surgery, do it right, so that you can get up and run the triathlon again, or something like that? And I'm kind of trivializing it, but.
Well, I don't know if the users need to know the constraints, but sometimes it would be maybe helpful if you understood why decisions were made.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yep.
It's like, why did they do that? That makes no sense. Well, that might have been affected by something else that was affected by something else, or this domino effect is oftentimes. When I'm dealing, in fact, the project I was working on just today was, they wanted to change the program. We had to redesign the house. Well, as a result of that, we added almost 300 square feet to this house. And it was like, okay, well, red flag, better call a client. Do they really want to do that? They added these changes without even realizing that they were going to completely change the scale of the house as far as where it fits in the program.
Yeah, there's some things like that where you make a change without knowing what the ramifications are, but then there's other things that just show up, and as the designer or the architect on the project, you have to deal with it. And so I guess those can be, sometimes they're the same thing and sometimes they're different. I mean, for instance, I guess I think that constraints like that can make the story of the project more interesting, which also translates to people understanding architecture more if they know the story. Because if they know the reasons why you did something, like you're saying, Neil, then I think that maybe there's a little bit more understanding of what we do, which I think is better for the profession.
Yeah, no, I know where you're going with the topic and the question, and I wanted to play devil's advocate, just wondering whether or not it enhances kind of like the experience by knowing all of those constraints. And actually, the way that you just explained it, gives me a better perspective on what it was you're really going for. And you're right. I mean, there's the dynamic of, and you can look at it, maybe from a client's perspective, that's been really active in a project. And like, say, Neil, the project where, you're having to add, 300 or potentially adding 300 more square feet to this project, and all of the different little things that have happened. And so when the client sits back, when everything's done, and they go, wow, I can't believe that we're finally here. We've done this, and we've done that. We changed this, and we changed that. And they can sit there and they can look at where they started and then where they finished, and kind of just see the interesting little, path that, rises and falls and twists and turns and everything else. And can really kind of understand that, man, that was a hell of a challenge to get there, but look where we're at.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the story of any building. I think we always find pretty fascinating, because, I mean, pick up any architecture magazine or just about any magazine, they're always telling the story or the background. Isn't it fascinating, though, to learn the background about how a particular building was built, or how it came together, or why certain decisions were made? Well, there you go. It's the story of the constraints of the project.
Now, this is a little bit off the constraint topic a bit, but it's interesting. The current project that I'm working on, as everybody's probably heard, Annapolis Elementary School, that we're doing all of these stitching together two buildings that were 117 and 107 years old, and we're stitching it all together. One of the things that we're developing a presentation about the project right now, and what I had always intended to do was, because there's an elevation change between the two buildings, that we have these long corridors that have some of it's ramping, some of it's not, but we have these corridors that stitch these two buildings together. And I've made these recesses in the hallways that have always been intended to display photographs of the histories of these two buildings, and kind of bringing these two buildings together, both through their shared history, but also showing the graduating class of 1897, and then showing construction and just kind of stitching that story together to kind of tell a history that would normally be lost in a renovation, where you just come in, you see the old building, it's kind of beat up, it really didn't, it looked like it probably should have been torn down. Then you came in, you revitalized it, now it's bright and shiny again, but the history that those two buildings had throughout this 100 plus years gets lost, so to kind of retell it, that these have been contributing members of the community for so long, by photographs and all that other stuff. I thought it was a kind of a fun opportunity to kind of do something that told the story a little bit more than just, saying, okay, here's where the building was, here's where the building is now, and, look what we did to kind of connect them. A little off topic, but it was, we were talking about telling the story of the, how things get there, and I just thought I'd share.
Well, I think that's where there's the biggest opportunities in the projects that we do are in solving the problems with the constraints that we have. And the more people that we can kind of share that with, I think it really shows how people who are in the field of architecture, to use the cliche, think outside of the box. With the way that we're solving problems, with the way that we have issues coming at us from all different angles, whether it's a client or a developer or a consultant or, an ordinance or whatever it is, a city, it could be a governing body. It could be anything. It could be the code. There's all of these things you have to synthesize into a solution. And the more that we can involve the clients and just the general public in that process, and show how what we do is important, I think that's an important aspect to you kind of changing the perception of architecture and what architects do. I guess that's why I think constraints, like people realizing what these constraints are and us kind of educating people on what they are, is important for us. I don't think we do that enough. You get, at the end, you have a product. It's seen as a product,
right?
That the builder delivers to the owner. And at that point, you're almost in the background. I mean, I was at a ceremony the other night with one other person from my firm, and we were mentioned as the passing breeze, but everybody who sat on the board of directors for that body of, for that place, I mean, they were the heroes of the night. And so that's what I mean. Like, I feel like, and I felt like that was a really successful project. I feel like we really did enamor people with the story. And that's why we were so successful with the solution we came up with, and that they did approve it. Like, hats off to them. They are the ones who said, yes, this is the thing we want to do. And we were kind of masters at crafting that story to enable them to do that.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we were a very small speck in the presentation of the success of that project. And I'm trying to figure out ways for us, to be a bit more relevant.
And that tends to happen a lot. I remember one time we had such a huge undertaking to get a public pool designed and constructed in, a more disadvantaged neighborhood. And the site was a challenge, the neighborhood, constant vandalism during both, the design and measuring process all the way through to construction. I mean, there was some really interesting, challenges that we faced. And through the whole thing, I mean, we kind of helped guide everybody through the process to kind of get to the very end. I mean, we went it felt like we did more, and this was early on in my career, so it kind of felt like, and now I'm learning that that's kind of what we do. But we were the guide, we were the educators, we were the ones who kind of shepherd. Actually, that was the word I was looking for. We were the shepherds that kind of pulled everything through. And when it came through the dedication ceremony, everybody was up there, spit and polished and looked great. They called everybody's name out. They, thanked everybody. And at the very end, we're all looking at each other. It's like, so nothing? We don't get anything? Not a thanks to the architects? Nothing? I mean, yeah. Throw me a bone, something. Just say, hey, and the architects did a great job or something. And it's interesting that I notice a lot of times when we go through all of these dedications, it is the roll call of the public officials, and
it's the back patting.
Exactly.
Totally.
And so so let me ask you this. I mean, is the constraints or understanding of the constraints, or calling our name in a dedication or something, is that kind of our call for a little bit of validation? I don't want to sound cynical here, but I mean, is it just like hey, we did have a part in this kind of thing, or I mean, what do you think?
Well, if that doesn't happen, I think you feel pretty marginalized. Right?
And you know what? That's it. You're right. I mean, we do. I mean, a lot of times you just say thanks, man, kind of thing, and you are, and when you're left out, you do kind of feel slighted and marginalized. You're just like, wow, I mean, honestly, it's like, go back to this current project. I mean, right now I'm in year 4 of this project, and I've got another year and a half to go before it's occupied. And I can pretty much say what's going to happen at the dedication. I mean, I'm going to be standing out in the crowd. Our firm is going to be standing out in the crowd, and they'll probably say, and thank you to our design and construction team. And as they've said on many of the other ones, and not acknowledge much of anything. But, now this is 5 years of our life. In fact, actually, in some cases, 7 years, because of the early studies and the assistance in helping fund it and all of that other stuff. So yeah, we will be marginalized.
Yeah, and I don't know if the topic of constraints, I don't think I really meant it to go in this direction.
I know
this is where it is,
sorry.
but no, it's okay. I guess what. Yeah, I'm not sure where that's headed. I mean, I think everybody kind of feels that every once in a while, for sure. I mean, that leads down a different road.
Let me ask you guys this question. Without constraints, how do we even design? I know.
Yes.
Many years ago, I was asked, when somebody asks you go to a party or whatever, and what do you do for a living? I'm an architect. Oh, wow. How cool. Haven't you always wanted to design your own house? I'm like, oh God, no. No, because
the sky's the limit.
The sky's the limit. I could design anything. I could spend the rest of my life designing my own house. No, I never wanted to do that. I did, but that's a whole nother story. But so I mean, so that was my fear, was that I wouldn't have any constraints, and of course that wasn't true. I had budget, and since we remodeled an existing house, I had an existing footprint. I actually had a lot of constraints. I couldn't go out further than the existing footprint of the house, so I had to make everything work within. And I find it incredibly difficult to design without constraints.
No, I totally get it, and it seems like constraints help you make decisions, right?
Well, you have
instead
to.
of
you make choices.
Yeah, instead of the unending what if this or what if that, and you could just never decide, right?
Well, sometimes that decision or that the major constraint is time.
Yeah.
There's a deadline, and I know when I'm designing, or like when I was in school one time, I had a family member pass away right at the beginning of it was my second year in architecture or something, and so I was away for 2 or 3 days, and I came back, and I had like essentially one night to design a project that everybody else had been working on for like 3 or 4 days in class. And so my constraint in that case was, okay, you've only got so many hours in the day or that night to basically design something, build a model, and present it the next morning.
That's a great way to get things done, man.
And holy smokes. Yeah, actually, in that case, the rest of the class, or for the rest of that quarter, we were doing a group project. So the next day or the day after, we had to select other classmates to partner up with to be part of our group. And I had missed like the first 4 days of class or something, so I didn't really know a lot of people. And I had people come up to me afterwards and say, "We want to be a partner with you in our group. We want you in our group because you get things done. You make decisions." And and I became that person of the group. It was like, okay, we got to make a decision.
You're the decider.
We make it. Yeah. And I wasn't a very popular person after that class was over that semester. But I mean, we had a great project, and we did great at it.
Well,
but
I think
when you have that time constraint, you have to make quick decisions, and sometimes you would like to spend more time, but if you do, you kind of meander and wander when you have that time constraint. And sometimes it's a budget constraint. It can be lots of different things.
Yeah, I think.
But
I think what you were saying. One thing that's interesting is a lot of architects, I guess anybody in a creative field, don't know what to do if they don't have a deadline. I think we were raised on deadlines, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And so if you don't have a deadline, you're kind of sitting there twiddling your thumbs, like, oh man, I could just do whatever. What am I going to do?
Well, we procrastinate.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's a topic for another episode we have coming up.
Yeah, in fact, I actually explained to our architectural interns, I'm like, forget about the linear time as you know it. Your life is now going to be demanded and dictated by deadlines. Milestones and deadlines. That's how you will live your life for the rest of your being. Probably scares the crap out of them, but it's fun to say. What do you mean?
Well, another kind of constraint like that we had on one of our projects, we had a fault line running through our site. And so that caused us to make decisions programmatically and structurally that if you were to visit the building, you would be like, why the heck did they do this? Why is the library floating over nothing? And why is there a column holding it up that's canted at 22 degrees or whatever it was at? And that's because of this. And this is kind of a weird thing to talk about because it's like, you've got a fault line and the building is safe if you are exactly 20 feet away from that fault line. Give me a break, right? But that's what the rules are, or whatever the distance is, right? And so it's like, that's where our footing had to be. This is where the space had to be up above that. And so we had to kick this column out to hold it up. But I think visiting that, you would never know that there's a fault line there, right? It's an invisible. on the site. You would never know that it's there. But it runs through on this diagonal angle, and it goes right under the library on this building. And so it's like what we did, somebody could come in, another architect, just somebody who's visiting, whatever, and just be like, man, they spent way too much money with structural gymnastics doing this. Why didn't they do the more efficient thing? Blah, 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 blah. And again, this is just kind of getting back to the whole thing of the people who actually visit the site probably don't know what the constraints are that you had to deal with. And so in this case, it could be construed as not the right thing to do, the decisions that were made. And I think that, the more projects that we do, I think we start to learn to create experiences out of those decisions so that they become interesting, and so that it brings up the opportunity to tell the story. And I guess I think that's a really important and interesting piece of the architecture.
Well, what's a good way to tell that story, Evan? I mean, do we need to create a little photo,
like a plaque?
Coffee table?
There's a
book?
kiosk.
Well,
yeah,
it's a web page for the building, or a coffee table book that we self-publish or something that kind of tells that story, for historical purposes. Or
well, I think that goes back to Cormac's idea of creating way you kind of embed it in the building. But I think the really good stories are ones that spread word of mouth. And so if you can get the user group that you're kind of dealing with as you're going through the process to really get into it, genuinely, if you can get them excited about the story that you're creating or that you are embedding into the design, they will just naturally tell other people, because they're going to, hey, come check out this new thing that we did. And when they're walking through it, they're going to be excited to tell other people about that. And then they're going to tell other people about it. And the story will live on. It doesn't have to happen at a grand scale. It just has to happen for the people who care about it. I mean, and I think it kind of organically spreads naturally. Naturally.
Yeah, it's
Archispeak.
What Evan's initial idea about constraints, that's a story that's really hard to tell. I mean, and in fact, a lot of times, as we're talking here, it goes unnoticed. It's really difficult to, if you're not involved with the project throughout the entire process, I mean, you're really never going to know it. And it's hard to capture that in the building, in the final design and things like that. I mean, the final design is a result of all of those constraints, but, it's really hard to kind of tell that story and kind of present the story to the layman that doesn't know. I mean, when you were giving your example, Evan, I was thinking to myself that some of the worst offenders to not knowing or not appreciating the constraints that are on buildings are architects. Think about how many times you walk into a building and you spend time, you judge it. You spend time looking at all of the trim, the finishes. You look at, why did this line, kind of just stop here? Shouldn't have kept going here, and we know we are actively involved in all of these different, types of decisions and demands on a project, yet we're the ones who are probably more critical about end results as it, and almost completely negate the fact that there were all of these constraints.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, this working in the public arena, in public works, it's financial. The constraint is financial.
Oh, yeah.
You start off with grand ideas and they slowly get compromised because of finances. And architecture is expensive. I mean, there's a lot of, I totally get what you're saying. And we do it all the time.
Well, I mean,
right? Everybody does it.
We're looking at, we like everybody like to see the finished product. We like to see the pretty pictures in the book. We like to, go and experience a place kind of almost like we were going to Disney World, and we want to see it for the first time and kind of experience the fantasy of the place. And then when we get there, we, being the architectural professionals with, the typical cynicism that we kind of bring to, the table of things, we look at it and you're just like, why is this jutting out in that direction, or why is that column at 22 degrees? And why is that, media center or library or whatever floating over an empty space? And, it's just like, we sit there and we kind of like, dig into things and try to grab a hold of it. But in a way, though, let's turn that around, though. We actually are trying to pull out the constraints off of, here's our final view of what it is. We get overly critical about, certain things, or we kind of latch on to, certain ideas and stuff. But then we start to pull out, well, maybe they, had this, happen, or maybe they found that, we were renovating a building and it didn't have footings. And so they had to do this, this, and this. And that was what the end result would have, had lent to it. So maybe in a way, our kind of criticism of the end, the end result, and then kind of like rationalizing why that would have happened, is kind of pulling out and kind of commiserating with the constraints. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think also a lot of times when you're judging, if you're not even at the building and you're judging it, I mean, that's one thing. But if you're really there, and it's not every time the building can speak for itself, right? And which leads back to the difficulty of telling the story. But there's some times where it's like, well, the library had to be on the second floor because it's critical that it was adjacent to this space and this space, and those only can happen on the second floor. And because of that, the library gets this amazing view and this amazing daylight. And we also were able to create this previously unprogrammed space down on the ground floor that's now a covered lunch shelter, because of that. And so there's extra benefits that we got out of really figuring out how to float this space over nothing. There, and I think again,
there you just pointed out the value of an architect,
those are the opportunities that you created from that problem that was presented. That nobody thought nobody thought of that recipe before you came to that solution.
It's funny you say that, because you're explaining this project that you worked on, and this project that I'm working on. Sure enough, 3-story building, top floor is the media center, and people have always asked, well, why is the media center on the third floor? And you try to explain it to him. First they don't know the space. They don't know all of the existing spaces, and they don't know that this is really one of the only places that offer that amount of square footage. But then you take them up there. In this particular,
and exactly. You've just got to go there.
We take them up there. We show them that it's got views of the state capitol, of the Naval Academy, of the harbor, of the city docks, and all of this other stuff. And it's got basically in this media center, you have got so many layers of American history just unfolding in front of your eyes as you're standing there with a book in your hand. And once they actually get up there and they can see it, they're like, wow, okay. So sorry.
Yeah, you realize that the building is miles away from those other things, but you were able to pull them into the building and make those things, the state capitol, the Naval Academy, part of the building and part of the experience. I mean, that's the story I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We did that on a K-8 school design that we worked on, and we aligned one of the corridors that had floor to ceiling glass on the end of it to point right at the university that was a few miles away, but you could see it. It was the biggest complex, but it was like, we want these kids every single day to see where they're going. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, nobody can see that on the set of plans on the paper. You've got to go there and experience it and see like, oh my God, like this is perfect, right? We're setting these kids up for success. And we're able to do that because of all of these, not only that's a geographical constraint, but we were able to manipulate the building to take advantage of that. Instead of looking at it as a negative, the way we had to orient the building and pack it on the site and get it to work with the grades, we took advantage of this amazing opportunity that nobody even knew existed until we put it down into that.
And that's kind of what we did there. Another thing, just
kind of. And Evan, you guys got a bonus for that, right?
Yeah. Well,
I just feel good that the kids get the bonus.
And that's the thing,
and there you go.
And Evan's right. I mean, that's the thing. So, I was telling you, we've got all these, corridors that are winding through the connection of these two buildings. Well, when this addition that we put together wasn't there, between the two buildings, if you were standing at one particular spot on the site, you could look through the buildings and you could see the state capitol. So what we ended up doing was basically the center point between these two buildings is a turn in the corridors. Well, the turn in that corridor is all glass, floor to ceiling, all the way through. So anytime you're walking and you're on axis with that one view that you used to have before the addition was there, you're now inside the building, recapturing that view right on over to the state capitol building. So every time a kid walks by, they still have that reconnection with, state government and all of that other stuff. But then we went one step further, and I placed the new means of egress, the new fire stairs, in line with that corridor, and put glass in that too. So when you're outside, you can look straight through the building and see the state capitol. And so you kind of reconnect, with all of these different things that the site used to offer, but you never really knew it. And now we're framing it out. And ultimately, at the end of the day, when, teachers are walking through, they're like, oh, look, state capitol. Kids are going to kind of keep it in the back of their mind. And
well, it becomes a teaching opportunity.
Exactly.
Awesome. And I guess that's one of the whole ideas behind constraints. And I think a lot of times I don't know if we do, but people look at constraints as being a negative. But like Neil said, how do you design without them?
Oh yeah. Well,
but number two, I mean, the biggest thing is like, this is the stuff that makes it architecture, right? This is the stuff that gets me the most excited about architecture, is being able to take all of these things and manipulate them to become a positive impact on the project. And if we can take our clients through that and make them a part of that process, then I think they really do start to see the value of going through that with us. It's not even the value of an architect. It's just going through that process, being a part of it, and being exposed to something that they never would have normally been exposed to.
Well,
and then that's a great thing.
Well, think about the project that you were talking about and the constraints that you had, and the excitement that you had presenting that to the client and explaining to them, okay, yeah, we got this big, huge problem, but here, check this out. This is how we solved it. And this is what you kind of get out of it. And you're just rolling along and you're saying, and we did this, and we did this, and we did this. And you're just so filled with excitement. I mean, that right there,
it's contagious.
Is just as fun, for you as it is for when the end result is that, you get this really cool space, and, it's an opportunity for extended learning and all of this other stuff. You've got all of that at the very end, but then it's, your fun of being able to teach other people how all of these constraints led to this, extraordinary opportunity that can be, continue to be used for, time to come. So
yeah, and then your project manager steps in and says, yeah, looks good. Start over.
Are you speaking from experience there?
Oh, Neil.
No, it's referencing good Twitter comments from the last week or two.
Well, but, I mean, And that's when you try to become contagious with your excitement and get the project manager on board. I mean, opportunities don't have to be the negative, cost overrun, things like that. You take them and you kind of make them as best as you can, right? And
that's what we do. Yeah. I mean, that's the design process, right?
It is.
I mean, that we go through. I mean, a program in and of itself is a list of constraints.
Yep.
And then it's our job to find the opportunities within those. And that's the value of architecture.
And it's amazing how every single person who were to tackle that problem would come up with a slightly or majorly different solution.
Yeah.
I think that's such an amazing thing.
Well, that's why it's good to have on a team or a project team, to get everybody involved. Or in some cases, I know one firm I worked at, we at one point, stopped work on, I don't know, Thursday or something at noon and pulled everybody in. We gave everyone kind of an overview of this fairly large project that we were doing and kind of the general scope and some information about it, and said, okay, now everybody break into, 2 or 3 teams and do a little design charrette for the afternoon. And at 4:00, we're going to have some wine and some goodies, and everybody pin up your thoughts and ideas of where we could go with this. And, I thought that was a great way to involve everyone in the office, to get some ideas and, do a little brainstorm on, how do we solve this puzzle of constraints that we have to come up with a project for our client.
Oh, yeah, sounds fun.
Now take that and then go to the next layer because so now you've done all of this stuff and you've kind of everybody's kind of brainstorming and gotten their minds wrapped around the problems and the opportunities and the objectives of the project and stuff, and then you pull in engineers and surveyors and things like that, and they're like, well, you got to do this and this, and say it's an existing building that you're renovating, you're like, well, your floor to floor height's only 10 feet, and you've got to get all this duct work and plumbing and everything else, and then you start, now you're adding even more complexity and layers on top of that, and you're, now you've got to figure out, okay, and by the way, the building doesn't have an existing foundation, so now you've got to, you're throwing all of this stuff in, you've got to, do underpinning and stuff, and then you start throwing all these layers in and stuff, and in the, complexity of it becomes even more, and so it's more opportunity to be able to kind of like wrangle in all of these constraints and say, okay, well, here's my preconceived notion of what I really wanted to do. Now here's the reality of things. How do I marry those two up? And what new solution can I come up with? And I've always enjoyed, being able to kind of like do that, be able to kind of like wrangle all of that stuff together and just say, okay, here's what we've got. And, Evan, you were saying this is like, well, people come in and they're like, well, they don't really fully understand why you did what you did, and why this column is doing that and stuff. And they don't see those constraints, but it's, I guess in a way, I mean, how do we, I guess when we come full circle, how do we actually tell that story? I mean, how do we, there are, so many different things about this. How do, and I don't necessarily think it is the coffee coffee table book. It's the, how do we like really tell this story?
Well, it is important for us to tell the story, but I also think it's really important for us to involve the owner of the building or the group, whoever's involved, to become the ambassadors of that story. And so it's our job to tell it during the process, but it's really for them to take it over afterward and make it part of their operation.
And that I think is the recipe of the successful buildings, is being able to excuse me, being able to involve the client enough where, we always, whether it's a love-hate relationship or whatever, we always love our buildings and put so much into them that, we're an easy ambassador for that. But it's getting the actual user group, owners and, people, and even contractors to love and appreciate the building the same way we do, so that they actually can share that story. And I think you're right.
Yeah.
That's what makes, more successful.
Well, it comes down to creating an emotional connection, right? Like you said, you love the building. It's your job to hopefully get everybody on the team to love the building. And that emotional connection is what creates that bond. Whereas if it is simply a technical or, kind of a surface relationship where basically, yes, the architect took the program and they fit it all within the box and they checked off, we've got this, we've got 2 of those, we've got 3 of those bathrooms, we've got an elevator. And if it simply is a list, if it is a list of qualifications or program or whatever it is that were just simply checked off, to me, that's the difference between success and not having a successful project. It's the difference between a building and architecture.
I was just about to ask it. Can you tell the difference between the formulaic check off, all of the different, we got this. Can you tell the difference between that approach and the one that's like truly loved? And, yes, you already answered it. So I was going to ask the question if you can tell the difference, and you can. You really can. I mean, anybody in our profession can tell the difference between, a building and architecture, because they're 2 completely different things.
Yep, I agree, and I think it's our job to educate the general public about that. What makes it architecture?
Yeah,
and what makes it just a building. It's good stuff. You guys want to wrap it up?
Sure.
Well, on that note, if you have any questions or comments, please visit our website at archispeakpodcast.com or on our individual Twitter accounts, which are listed on the website. You can also follow Archispeak on Twitter. And please remember to post links to interesting topics or articles that you see on our Facebook page. And don't forget, you can also call and leave us a message at our phone number, which is 415-484-8496. And if you can, leave us a review on iTunes as well.
Yeah, and something new that we're starting this week is if you would like to get the notes from the show delivered to your inbox when the show goes live, we would love to send you that stuff. So go to archispeakpodcast.com, and on the right-hand side of the page, you can enter to subscribe to the show notes, and we'll just send those to you so that you don't have to go to the site and look for them. That would be cool.
Well, that wraps episode 15. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.
All right, see you.
Thank you, guys.
First thing in the morning, I'll draw to you. Then with that warning, you'll be born to wander. Promise girlfriend.